A virgin Amish man fell for a girl he can't touch. Then this happened. Snow slams against a lonely barn door as a devout craftsman kneels by his fire, praying for peace. But when a half-frozen stranger begs to be let in, everything he's ever believed is put to the test. He saves her life, without laying a single hand on her. In a world where one touch could destroy his faith, mercy pulls him closer than desire ever could. Whispers spread through the church. A cousin's secret crime hides in the shadows, and a single lie could exile him forever. Now the town demands judgment. The bishop wants obedience, and the woman he saved carries the truth that could damn them both, or set them free. As rifles load and church bells toll across the valley, when faith forbids touch, can love still reach the heart? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The bitter wind howled across the Colorado plains, driving snow against the sturdy walls of Adrian Stoltzfus's workshop. Inside, the young Amish craftsman worked by lamplight, his strong hands steady as he shaped the fresh oak for a broken wagon wheel. The flame flickered in its glass chimney, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn beams above. Adrian paused to wipe his brow with a plain cotton sleeve. At 28 years old, his face showed the weathering of honest labor, though his eyes held the gentleness taught by his faith. The neat beard, required by Ordnung law, framed features more used to quiet contemplation than conversation. The heavy thuds against his door startled him from his work. At first, he thought it was just another gust rattling the shutters, but then came the unmistakable sound of desperate knocking. Adrian set down his tools and approached cautiously, lifting the lamp. "Please," came a woman's voice, weak and trembling. "Someone help me." Adrian's hand hesitated on the latch. The Ordnung was strict about unmarried men and women meeting alone. Such things led to temptation, to sin. But the voice spoke again, fainter now, and he could hear teeth chattering. "The Lord tests our hearts," he murmured, reaching for a long-handled shovel that leaned against the wall. He opened the door, and bitter wind whipped inside, nearly extinguishing his lamp. There stood a young woman, her dark bonnet torn and dusted with snow. Her face was pale as milk, her lips taking on a dangerous blue tinge. She swayed on her feet, eyes glazing over. "Thank God," she whispered, then began to crumple. Moving swiftly but carefully, Adrian extended the shovel handle wrapped in a thick wool blanket. "Here," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Take hold." The woman, who he would later learn was Addison James, grabbed the offered lifeline. Adrian used it to guide her inside without touching her, maintaining the distance his faith required while still offering aid. As soon as she cleared the threshold, she collapsed near the pot-bellied stove where its banked coals still gave off healing warmth. Adrian shut the door against the storm, then moved to the far side of his workshop. His heart pounded with uncertainty. He had never been alone with a woman who wasn't family before. Kneeling, he began to pray aloud, his Pennsylvania Dutch accent thick with emotion. "Lord, grant me wisdom. Show me the path between mercy and righteousness." The woman stirred at the sound of his voice, but didn't rise. Her clothes were soaked through, and she shivered violently despite the stove's heat. Adrian added wood to the fire, careful to keep his distance. When Addison finally opened her eyes, she flinched from the lamp's glow and turned her face away. But after a moment, she spoke softly. "Thank you, sir. I was lost in the storm." "You are safe here," Adrian replied, though he stayed in his corner. "The storm makes travel impossible tonight." He fetched a dipper of water from his barrel, sliding it across the plank floor to her. As she drank, he noticed her trembling hands, the fear she tried to hide. Something had driven her out into such weather, something worse than the bitter cold. Through the long hours, the blizzard raged outside. Wind screamed through every crack, and snow piled against the windows until they were sealed in dim, lamplit isolation. Adrian returned to his workbench, but his thoughts were far from wagon wheels now. The Ordnung was clear about such situations. A man and woman, unmarried and unchaperoned. It wasn't proper. Come morning, he should send her on her way, regardless of the weather or whatever trouble pursued her. That would be the righteous path. And yet, he thought of the Good Samaritan who helped the stranger on the road when others passed by. Was not mercy also righteousness? Adrian's hands worked the wood as his mind wrestled with this test of faith. The woman huddled by his stove had needed help, and he had given it. But now what? Near midnight, he heard her soft, steady breathing. She had fallen asleep, wrapped in the blanket he'd provided. Adrian added more wood to the stove, then settled into his chair, prepared to keep vigil until dawn. Outside, the storm showed no sign of weakening, and his heart remained troubled about what morning would bring. He had chosen mercy over fear of sin tonight. But as the hours crept by, Adrian wondered if that choice would demand even more of him when the sun rose. For now he could only pray and wait as the wind howled its lonely song across the Colorado night. Dawn broke over the workshop, painting the snow-covered hills in shades of pearl. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of white that stretched as far as the eye could see. Inside, Adrian stirred from his chair, his muscles stiff from the night's vigil. Addison was already awake, folding the borrowed blanket with careful hands. "I should go," she said softly, though her face was still pale. She took 2 steps toward the door and swayed dangerously. Adrian moved quickly, pushing a stool behind her with his foot just as she sank down. "9," he said firmly, forgetting English in his concern. "You are not well enough." "But I cannot stay here," Addison protested weakly. "Your reputation—" "The barn," Adrian interrupted, surprising himself with his decisiveness. "There is clean hay in the loft, warm from the animals below. None would think to look there." He paused, conscience warring with compassion. "You can rest undisturbed until you are stronger." After ensuring Addison could walk steadily, Adrian led her through the deep snow to the barn, using the shovel handle as before to maintain proper distance. The morning sun streamed through the barn's high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. Later, Adrian brought breakfast, fresh bread and apple cider. They ate separately, he on an upturned bucket near the door, she in the shadowy loft above. The silence between them was broken only by the soft lowing of his cow below. "They said I was fallen," Addison spoke suddenly, her voice tight with remembered pain. "The stagecoach driver in Denver. He wouldn't listen when I tried to explain. Just left me by the road like so much unwanted baggage." Adrian looked up, careful to keep his gaze averted from her direct presence. "Why would they say such things?" There was a rustle of fabric, then a small click. "This is all I have left of my mother," Addison said. A locket dangled from the loft edge on its chain, swaying gently. Adrian approached and examined it without touching, seeing the faded daguerreotype of a gentle-faced woman within. "She taught me to be honest," Addison continued, her voice stronger now. "To stand up for what's right. But when that saloon keeper—" She trailed off, then added firmly, "I defended myself, that's all. But in a town like that, a woman alone has no voice against such men's lies." Adrian nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his heart. He had seen such injustice before, though his sheltered community usually stood apart from it. "Come," he said after a moment. "I will teach you to milk the cow. It will help you regain your strength." In the barn's dim interior, Adrian demonstrated the milking technique from a safe distance, explaining each step clearly. Addison proved a quick study, though her first attempts made the cow shift restlessly. Throughout the morning, wagon wheels creaked past on the snow-packed road, but none turned down the lane to the workshop. As evening approached, Adrian returned to his workshop, leaving Addison safely hidden above. The winter night fell early, and by lamplight he opened his well-worn Bible. His voice carried faintly through the thin walls as he read aloud. "Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Judge not, and you will not be judged." His voice trembled slightly over the familiar words, finding new meaning in them. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, the sharp jingle of sleigh bells cut through the crisp air. Adrian hurried to the barn, warning Addison to stay silent. Bishop Jacob Kaufman's sleigh drew up before the workshop, its runners cutting clean lines through the fresh snow. The bishop's tall form, wrapped in a heavy black coat, filled the workshop doorway. "Adrian," he said gravely, "I came as soon as the roads were passable. There are rumors from town." "What rumors, Bishop Kaufman?" Adrian asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "A woman traveling alone. Some say she passed this way during the storm." The bishop's stern face softened slightly. "You are like a son to me, Adrian. That is why I must warn you. Helping outsiders, especially women of uncertain virtue, it brings trouble, from both God and man." Adrian stood silent for a long moment, feeling the weight of his community's expectations pressing down like a physical thing. "I understand your concern," he said finally, choosing his words with care. "The Ordnung exists to protect us," the bishop continued, "to keep us pure in God's sight. Remember that." After the bishop departed, Adrian remained in his workshop, the sound of sleigh bells fading into the distance. He had not lied, had not denied helping someone in need, but neither had he revealed Addison's presence. For the first time in his life, he had chosen to stand apart from his community's judgment, guided by something deeper than rules alone. In the barn's loft, Addison huddled deeper into the hay, having heard every word. She understood now the risk Adrian took in helping her, not just his reputation, but his place in the only world he had ever known. The weight of that knowledge settled heavily on her heart as the winter sun climbed higher over the snow-covered hills. 2 days after the bishop's visit, Adrian hitched his horse to the buggy before dawn. The morning air bit cold and sharp as he drove the familiar road to the Plain Meeting House, where his community gathered each Sunday. Frost sparkled on bare tree branches, and his breath formed clouds in the winter air. Inside the meeting house, plain wooden benches creaked beneath the weight of the congregation. The austere walls held no decoration save the winter light streaming through clear glass windows. Adrian found his usual place, but today the familiar setting brought him no peace. As the first hymn began, the German words caught in his throat. "Gott ist die Liebe, lässt mich erlösen." God is love, lets me be redeemed. The congregation's voices rose around him, but guilt gnawed at his conscience. Each note felt like a stone in his chest. He could barely meet the eyes of his fellow church members, though he had done nothing wrong. Had he? During the sharing of community news, whispers circulated about strange tracks seen near the old stage road. "A stranger, they say," murmured Sister Ruth to her neighbor. "In weather like this, who would travel alone?" "Adrian," called Brother Miller after the service, "you work near that road. Have you seen anyone unusual lately?" Adrian kept his voice steady. The storm brought much snow. Any tracks I might have seen would be covered now. A harsh laugh cut through the quiet conversations. My cousin always did have a soft heart for strays. Adrian turned slowly. There stood Amos Stoltzfus in the meeting house doorway, his fine town clothes a stark contrast to the plain dress of the gathering. Though once Amish himself, Amos now owned the saloon in town, his face weathered by whiskey and late nights. "What brings you here, Amos?" Adrian asked quietly. Amos stepped forward, boots clicking on the wooden floor. The congregation fell silent, watching. "Can't a man visit his family? Though I must say, cousin, your holy life seems less pure these days." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Interesting tracks I saw by your barn. Too small for your boots, almost like a woman's." Heat rose in Adrian's face, but he remembered the bishop's teachings about turning the other cheek. He stood silent under his cousin's mocking gaze. "Nothing to say," Amos pressed. "Time was, you couldn't wait to point out my sins. Now look who's hiding secrets." "We are all sinners before God," Adrian said finally. "Even those who judge others." Amos's face darkened, but before he could respond, the bishop stepped between them. "This is a house of worship, Amos. If you've forgotten that, perhaps you should leave." The ride home seemed longer than usual. Adrian's mind churned with worry. Amos's words had planted seeds of doubt among the community. He could feel it in their stares, hear it in their whispers. At the workshop, Addison was hanging wet laundry in the barn's shadowy interior, where it would dry unseen. She had insisted on helping with chores, though Adrian had protested it wasn't necessary. She looked up as he entered, reading the trouble in his face. "Something's wrong," she said softly. Adrian nodded, explaining about Amos's appearance at the meeting house. "He saw your tracks," he finished. "He means to cause trouble." "I'm so sorry," Addison whispered, letting a damp sheet fall from her hands. "All you've done is show kindness, and I bring only risk to you. Perhaps I should leave." "No," Adrian said firmly. "The truth will protect us both. You have done nothing wrong, and neither have I." But doubt shadowed his eyes as he spoke, and they both knew it. That evening, after ensuring Addison had enough food and blankets in the loft, Adrian knelt beside his bed. The moonlight painted silver squares on the wooden floor as he bowed his head. "Lord," he prayed aloud, his voice barely above a whisper, "if I do wrong by helping her, show me. If I stray from your path by offering shelter, guide me back. But if mercy is your will," his voice caught, "if mercy is your will, give me strength to bear what comes." In the barn's loft, Addison lay awake, Adrian's humble prayer carrying through the still night air. Tears pricked her eyes at his simple faith, his willingness to face judgment for helping a stranger. She pulled the borrowed blanket closer, understanding for the first time the true cost of the protection he offered. Not just his reputation, but his very place in the world he loved. The moon climbed higher, casting long shadows through the barn's weathered walls. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the snow-covered fields. Neither Adrian nor Addison found sleep easily that night, each weighted by the growing tension that threatened to tear apart the fragile peace they had found. The late winter snows began to surrender to spring's warmth. Icicles dripped steadily from the workshop eaves, and patches of muddy earth emerged from beneath the white blanket. The change brought new rhythms to Adrian's farm, and with them, new challenges in keeping Addison hidden. In the gray hours before dawn, Adrian found himself teaching her the daily chores. Like this, he demonstrated from a careful distance, showing her how to gather eggs from beneath his fussy hens. "Move slow and steady. They'll learn to trust you." Addison nodded, her borrowed plain dress rustling as she reached into the nest boxes. Her fingers were gentle, and the hens barely stirred. "They're warm," she whispered, cradling the brown eggs. Days flowed together as winter's grip loosened. In the workshop, Adrian guided her through the art of stitching harness leather, explaining how to space the holes just so. "The thread must be waxed," he said, keeping his eyes on his work. "It strengthens the seam." Addison's needle flew swift and sure. "Like mending fine dresses," she mused, "though this feels more honest somehow." In the kitchen, he taught her to bake bread without leaven, the Amish way. "The dough needs a firm hand," he explained, kneading his portion while she worked her own at the far end of the table. Flour dusted their sleeves, and the yeastless scent filled the warm air. Adrian had given her one of his sister's old dresses and a head covering to wear, plain dark fabric that would draw no attention if anyone caught a glimpse of her. She learned to pin the covering just so, letting it frame her face in modest simplicity. Sometimes, watching her move through his home in Amish dress, Adrian felt a strange tightness in his chest that he dared not name. One quiet afternoon, as spring rain tapped against the workshop windows, Adrian found himself carving a small wooden sparrow. His knife moved surely through the soft pine, shaping delicate wings and a tilted head. He hadn't planned to make it for her, but when Addison appeared in the doorway with fresh bread, he found himself holding it out. "A sparrow," he said softly. "They return with hope each spring." Her fingers brushed his as she took the carving, and Adrian pulled back as if burned. But her smile, bright as morning, stayed with him long after she'd gone. The next day, while straining fresh milk, Addison stumbled. The pail tipped, sending white streams across the barn floor. She gasped, then, to both their surprise, laughed. The sound was pure and bright, and before he could stop himself, Adrian laughed too. The shared moment hung between them like sunlight, until Adrian remembered himself and turned away, his chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to joy. "I'm sorry," Addison said quickly, sobering. "I'll clean it up." "Nay, it's no matter," Adrian managed, but he fled to the far side of the barn, unsettled by how natural their laughter had felt. That afternoon, Ruth Lapp's arrival sent Addison scrambling for the hayloft. The widow's buggy creaked to a stop outside the workshop, where Adrian was sanding a new wagon wheel. "Thought I'd bring you some apple butter," Ruth called out, her sharp eyes taking in the yard. "Been meaning to thank you for fixing my loom last month." "Much obliged," Adrian said, carefully keeping his body between Ruth and the barn door. But Ruth's gaze had caught on something, a flash of gray through the barn slats, Addison's borrowed shawl left hanging to air. "New cloth?" Ruth asked, her voice carefully casual. "From a peddler," Adrian said quickly. "For rags." Ruth's lips pressed together. "Looks awful fine for rags." She glanced at Adrian's face, then away. "Well, the Lord sees all our works, doesn't he?" After Ruth left, Adrian found Addison in the workshop, her fingers tracing the wooden sparrow's wings. "I bring such risk to you," she said softly. "You're a man kinder than any preacher I've known, and I repay you with danger." The words struck Adrian like physical blows. Kindness, risk, the growing warmth between them that he couldn't seem to fight. Without a word, he turned and walked out into the deepening dusk, his steps hurried as if fleeing temptation itself. But Grace followed him, wrapped in the evening prayer call of returning sparrows. He stood in his yard, caught between his faith's rigid demands and the gentle pull of compassion that felt, somehow, equally holy. The spring mud sucked at his boots as he struggled to find his footing in more ways than one. A week of spring warmth had coaxed green buds from the branches when the whispers reached Adrian's farm. Riders from town brought word of lawmen searching the county for a witness, someone who'd seen what happened to Deputy Marshal Shaw after a late-night card game gone wrong. Adrian was splitting wood when Mrs. Miller's wagon passed. She slowed her horse, leaning down from her seat. "They're saying the witness might be a woman," she called out. "Strange woman passing through. You ain't seen nobody like that, have you? Adrian Stoltzfus?" "9," he answered, the lie bitter on his tongue. "Just my own quiet here." Inside the barn, Addison had frozen in the act of feeding chickens. Her face had gone white as fresh milk, and her hands trembled on the feed bucket. When Mrs. Miller's wagon, wheels faded, she sank down onto a hay bale. "It was Amos," she whispered, her voice barely stirring the dust motes in the lantern light. "Your cousin. I saw him shoot the deputy after they argued over cards. I was walking past the saloon window looking for work. The deputy accused him of cheating, and Amos—" She wrapped her arms around herself. "Please don't tell them I'm here. Amos will kill me before I can testify." Adrian's heart pounded against his ribs like a trapped bird. The ordnung was clear. God's people must submit to authority, must speak truth to power. Yet this was Amos, his own bloodkin, no matter how far the man had strayed. And Addison— "I need to pray," he managed, his voice rough. He strode to his cabin, where the stove stood cold and dark. Sinking to his knees beside it, Adrian bent his head. "Lord," he whispered into the gathering dark, "show me the path of righteousness." Hours crept past. The moon rose and set. Still Adrian knelt, wrestling with duty and mercy, truth and protection. When dawn's first gray light crept through his window, his knees ached, but his heart was no lighter. Rising stiffly, he went to check on Addison in the barn. The hayloft was empty. In her place lay a folded piece of paper torn from his Bible's blank pages. His hands shook as he read her careful script. "Dear friend, I cannot bear to bring more trouble to your door. You have shown me more kindness than I deserve. I go now, before my presence ruins the life you've built. God keep you safe. Addison." The words blurred before his eyes. Without stopping to think, Adrian ran to the stable. His horse nickered as he threw on saddle and bridle. The morning air bit sharp and cold as he urged the horse out, scanning the frozen ground for tracks. There, footprints in the frost, heading toward the hills. Adrian followed them at a trot, his breath clouding. The sun was just touching the snow-laden pines when he spotted her, a dark figure trudging up the slope, hunched against the cold. Adrian spurred his horse forward, then dismounted in her path. Even now he kept the proper distance between them, but planted his feet firm in the frozen mud. "The Lord didn't send you here for me to abandon you," he said, his voice carrying clear in the still morning air. Addison stopped, her borrowed shawl pulled tight. "I saw the struggle in your eyes," she said softly. "I won't make you choose between your conscience and my safety. The choice is already made." Adrian's words surprised even himself with their certainty. "My conscience tells me to protect the innocent, even from my own kin. But your people, my people believe in justice and mercy." He gestured toward his horse. "Come back. We'll find a way that serves both truth and wisdom." Addison's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk everything for a stranger?" "Because," Adrian said slowly, "perhaps the Lord sent you not to test my obedience, but to teach me about grace." The rising sun caught the tears on Addison's cheeks, turning them to gold. After a long moment, she nodded. Together, still careful not to touch, they walked back toward the horse. Adrian helped her mount using a fallen log as a step, then led the horse on foot down the hill. The sun climbed higher as they approached the farm, painting the snow-laden pines in rose and amber. Adrian felt the weight of his decision settle onto his shoulders, heavy but somehow right. Whatever came next, he knew he could face it with clear conscience and steady heart. 3 days passed like shadows across Adrian's workshop floor. Each morning brought fresh worry, each evening new prayers for guidance. The spring wind carried whispers through the settlement, whispers that reached Bishop Kaufman's ears and brought him riding up Adrian's lane on a steel-gray afternoon. Adrian saw the bishop's buggy approaching through the window while he was mending a bridle. His heart jumped into his throat. "Quick," he whispered to Addison, who was sweeping nearby. "The cellar." She disappeared down the rough wooden steps just as the bishop's boots scraped on the porch. Adrian opened the door, bowing his head in respect. "Bishop Kaufman." The older man's stern face was creased with concern. He stepped inside, his black coat dusted with road dirt. "Adrian, my son, the community speaks of strange happenings here." "Strange, Bishop?" Adrian kept his voice steady, though his palms had gone damp. Bishop Kaufman moved to the kitchen table, running one finger along its surface. "Ruth Lapp mentioned seeing women's clothing. Others note your stores depleting faster than a single man's should." He fixed Adrian with a penetrating stare. "This morning, Samuel Fisher reported fresh footprints by the creek, small ones, a woman's size." Adrian's throat went dry. Never in his 28 years had he spoken an outright lie. But now the words came, falling from his lips like stones. "I've been feeding some stray dogs, Bishop. They come at night, hungry from the winter." "Dogs?" The bishop's voice was flat with disbelief. "Yeah, it seemed the Christian thing." "And the clothes Ruth saw?" "A peddler's wares. I thought to buy something for my sister's birthday." Each lie felt like a shard of glass in Adrian's mouth. Below their feet, hidden in the cellar's shadows, Addison held her breath. Bishop Kaufman stood silent for a long moment. Finally, he reached into his coat and withdrew a folded letter. He placed it carefully on the table. "The elders have discussed your recent behavior, Adrian. This is a letter of admonition. One more incident that breaks our Ordnung, one more whisper of impropriety, and you will face the Meidung, the shunning." His voice softened slightly. "Do not force us to cast you out, my son. Return to the path of righteousness." Adrian stared at the letter, its cream-colored paper stark against the dark wood. "I understand, Bishop." After the bishop left, Adrian stood, motionless, until the buggy's wheels faded into distance. Only then did he open the cellar door. Addison emerged, her borrowed dress dusty from hiding. Without a word, she took up a bucket and began scrubbing the floor, as if to wash away any trace of her presence. The sunset painted the kitchen windows amber as they worked. Addison on her knees with the scrub brush, Adrian at the table with his mending. The letter of admonition lay between them like a sword. "I never meant to bring such trouble to your door," Addison said softly, wringing out her cloth. "Before I came here, I used to pray every night. I asked God to send someone, anyone, who would look at me and see something clean again, not just the rumors and shame others heaped upon me." She paused, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "He sent you. And now my presence may cost you everything you hold dear." Adrian's hands trembled on his leather work. Something vast and terrible and wonderful was cracking open inside his chest. Without thinking, he reached toward her, then yanked his hand back as if burned, shame flooding his face. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Addison set down her brush. "Perhaps we should pray," she whispered. "Together, but apart, as always." Adrian nodded, unable to speak. They knelt on opposite sides of the kitchen, Addison by the stove, Adrian near the window where the last light fell. Their whispered prayers mingled in the gathering dusk. "Lord, forgive me my weakness," Adrian murmured, his shoulders bowed. "Father, show us the way," Addison breathed, her hands clasped tight. Neither fully understood what forgiveness they sought, for lies told, for boundaries tested, for feelings that defied the rigid walls between them. They only knew that something was changing, as surely as winter had yielded to spring. Adrian's faith, once a stark line between right and wrong, was becoming something different. A living thing that grew toward compassion, like a flower turning toward light. The room darkened around their bowed heads. Still they knelt, together in their separation, while outside the first stars began to shine. The April sun warmed the muddy ground around Adrian's workshop as spring deepened its hold on the land. New grass sprouted in emerald patches, and the first wildflowers dotted the meadow beyond his fence. Adrian worked steadily, the rhythmic sound of his wood plane filling the afternoon air. A shrill whinny pierced the peace. Adrian looked up to see young Thomas Miller's new colt thrashing near the fence line, its leg caught between two posts. The animal's terror-filled eyes rolled white as it struggled, making its situation worse. "Whoa there," Thomas called, dismounting from his own horse. "Adrian, the colt's hurt bad. I need to ride for Doc Werner. Can you watch him?" Adrian nodded, setting down his tools. "Yeah, I will stay with him." As Thomas galloped off, Addison emerged from the barn where she'd been, mending harnesses. Without hesitation, she rushed toward the injured colt, her plain dress billowing. "Addison, no!" Adrian called out, but she was already kneeling beside the frightened animal. "He needs help now," she said firmly. In one swift motion, she tore a long strip from her skirt. "Tell me what to do." Adrian's hands clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to help directly. Instead, he called out instructions from a safe distance. "Speak soft to him. Let him know you mean no harm." Addison's voice came out gentle as spring rain. "There now, young one. Easy does it." The colt's breathing slowed as she carefully freed its leg from the fence. "Now wrap the cloth just above the joint," Adrian directed. "Not too tight, just enough to keep it steady." Her fingers worked quickly, securing the makeshift bandage. The colt allowed her touch, somehow sensing her desire to help. When she finished, the animal stood quieter, though still favoring its injured leg. "You've done this before," Adrian observed, surprised by her skill. "My mother taught me," Addison said, smoothing the colt's mane. "She had a way with horses." Their eyes met across the yard, and something shifted in the spring air between them. For the first time in weeks, Adrian felt his smile come easily. "You did well." "We did well," she corrected, and a small laugh escaped her, clear and bright as a bell. The sound of her laughter eased something in Adrian's chest. As they waited for Thomas to return, they settled into a comfortable silence. The afternoon light turned golden, casting long shadows across the yard. From her place beside the colt, Addison began to hum softly, one of the hymns she'd heard Adrian read during his evening devotions. Adrian recognized the melody, "Be Thou My Vision." Without thinking, he joined in, his deep voice harmonizing with her lighter one. Their singing filled the yard with gentle music as the sun sank toward the horizon. But their peace shattered like glass when Ruth Lapp's wagon appeared on the road. The widow slowed her horse, peering toward the fence where Addison stood in plain view. Their eyes met for one frozen moment. Ruth's face drained of color. She recognized Addison, the stranger whose presence had sparked so many whispers. With trembling hands, she snapped her reins and urged her horse forward, the wagon wheels spinning in the mud as she fled. Adrian's heart sank like a stone. "She will tell the bishop." "I know." Addison's voice was barely a whisper. She stepped away from the colt, her torn skirt muddy at the hem. Adrian strode to his workshop, mind racing. "We must leave before they call a hearing. There's no time to waste." He began gathering tools, leather pieces, and supplies. "I have a wagon ready. We can be gone by nightfall." "Adrian." Addison's voice cracked. "You can't leave everything, your home, your community, for my sake." He turned to face her, his expression grave. What is a home without mercy? What is community? Without truth? He gestured to the yard where they'd just worked together. "This afternoon, God showed us what we could be. Two souls working as one to heal his creature. I cannot go back to rigid rules that would have left that colt suffering." Addison's hands shook as she gathered her few possessions: the borrowed plain dress, her mother's locket, the wooden sparrow Adrian had carved. Each item went into a small bundle that seemed to carry the weight of their shared fate. "Where will we go?" she asked. "West," Adrian replied, already loading the wagon with essential supplies. "There are other settlements, places where faith and compassion need not war with each other." The sun touched the horizon, painting the workshop in shades of amber and shadow. Soon, Ruth would reach the bishop's house. Soon, the quiet afternoon would become a memory of their last moment of peace. Adrian hitched his strongest horse to the wagon, while Addison filled water barrels. Neither spoke of the cost of what was to come: the shunning, the isolation, the uncertain road ahead. They worked quickly, knowing that time, like the fading daylight, was slipping away from them. The pre-dawn darkness shrouded Adrian's workshop in deep shadows. Only a single lantern flickered inside as he and Addison hurriedly packed supplies. The crunch of hooves on gravel made them both freeze. Through the window, they saw a lone rider approaching, his form black against the star-studded sky. "It's Amish," Addison whispered, shrinking back into the shadows. Adrian's cousin dismounted with a casual air that sent chills down Addison's spine. His spurs jangled against the wooden steps as he climbed to the workshop door. A knowing smirk played across his face. "Cousin," Amish called out, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Seems the whole town's talking about your secret guest. Thought I'd pay a friendly visit." Adrian stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the entrance. Though his heart hammered in his chest, his voice remained steady. "It's not yet morning, Amish. This is no time for visiting." "Oh, I reckon any time's good for family." Amish's eyes darted past Adrian's shoulder, searching the workshop's interior. "Especially when family's harboring a fugitive. Come on out, girl. We got business to settle." "She's not going anywhere with you," Adrian said quietly. Amish's face darkened. "You don't know what she is, cousin. She's tainted. Wait till the elders hear how their perfect Adrian's been hiding a fallen woman. Wonder what the bishop will say to that." From behind Adrian, Addison's voice rang out clear and strong. "You killed that deputy, Amish. I saw you shoot him after that card game. That's the real reason you want me gone." The words had barely left her mouth when Amish lunged forward, shoving past Adrian. His hand struck Addison's face with a sharp crack that echoed through the workshop. She stumbled backward, catching herself against the workbench. Adrian's muscles tensed, every instinct crying out to defend her. But his hands remained at his sides, his voice level as he spoke. "The truth will reach heaven even if I cannot speak it." Amish turned on him, teeth bared in a snarl. You and your holy ways. You think God cares about your precious truth? By sunrise, everyone will know what kind of woman you've been hiding. Your pure reputation won't survive this, cousin. He spat on the floor. You'll both be ruined by noon. With that, he stormed out of the workshop. His horse's hooves thundered away into the darkness, leaving behind a heavy silence. Adrian moved quickly to the water barrel, wetting a clean cloth. He approached Addison, who stood trembling, her cheek already beginning to swell. Here, he said softly, averting his eyes as he handed her the cool cloth. This will help with the pain. Addison pressed the cloth to her face, tears mixing with the water. We have to leave now, Adrian. Come west with me. There's nothing left for either of us here. No. Adrian's voice was gentle but firm. Running would only prove his lies true. We must trust in God's justice. But the bishop will do what he must. Adrian moved to his desk and pulled out paper and ink. But first, the law must know what really happened to that deputy. In the lantern's dim light, Adrian began to write. His pen scratched across the paper as he carefully detailed everything Addison had witnessed in the saloon that night. He wrote of the card game, the argument, the shot fired in anger. Each word felt like both a betrayal of his blood and a victory for his conscience. Addison watched him write, the cool cloth still pressed to her cheek. The marshal will want me to testify. Yes. Adrian's pen paused. But your words will bring justice, not vengeance. That's what separates us from Amos. He finished the letter, as the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. After signing his name, he sealed the envelope and addressed it to United States Marshal Samuel Crane. Adrian bowed his head, his hands folded over the sealed letter. Lord, he prayed aloud, let this truth bring peace, not bloodshed. Show us the path of righteousness, even when it leads through darkness. Addison knelt beside him, careful to maintain proper distance, and added her own whispered Amen. The letter felt heavy in Adrian's hands, heavier than its single sheet of paper should have been. In it lay the fate of his cousin, his own standing in the community, and perhaps Addison's very life. Yet as he prepared to ride into town to deliver it, he felt a strange peace settle over him. The truth, as he had told Amos, would indeed reach heaven, and through this letter it would reach earthly justice as well. The morning sun painted the eastern sky in watercolor hues as Adrian saddled his horse. His muscles ached from the sleepless night, but urgency drove him forward. The sealed letter felt like lead in his coat pocket. 12 miles to the telegraph office in Silver Creek would take most of the day. Be careful, Addison called softly from the workshop door. She wore the plain dress and bonnet that had become familiar these past weeks, her bruised cheek partially hidden by the fabric. Adrian nodded, unable to trust his voice. The mare's hooves clopped against the frozen ground as they set out, following the winding road through stands of pine and aspen. Spring birds called from the branches, their songs a stark contrast to the weight in his heart. The journey passed in prayer and contemplation. By midday, Silver Creek's wooden buildings rose before him, the telegraph office marked by its tall pole bristling with wires. Adrian dismounted stiffly, leading his horse to the hitching post. Inside, the telegraph operator, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, looked up from his clicking machine. Help you? This needs to reach Marshal Crane, Adrian said, producing the letter. It's urgent business about a murder. The operator's eyebrows rose, but he nodded professionally. Marshall's got a courier rides through here every afternoon. I'll make sure it reaches him direct. Adrian paid the fee from his dwindling savings, then stepped back into the spring sunshine. His duty was done. Now only God could guide what came next. The return journey seemed twice as long. Darkness had fallen by the time he spotted lamplight glowing from his workshop windows. When he opened the door, the sight inside stopped him short. Addison had transformed the simple space. A small table stood in the center, set with his 2 tin plates and a freshly pressed cloth. A single candle burned between them, its flame reflecting in the polished surfaces. The scent of beef stew filled the air. His mother's recipe, he realized with surprise. "You didn't have to do this," he said softly. "I wanted to." Addison stood by the stove, her hands clasped. "We need to talk, Adrian. Really talk, before whatever comes tomorrow." They sat at opposite ends of the small table, the candle flame dancing between them. For several minutes, they ate in familiar silence. Then Addison spoke. "All my life, I've wanted somewhere to belong, somewhere people saw me, not just my circumstances or their assumptions." Her voice trembled. "Here, in this workshop, with you, I found that place." Adrian set down his spoon, his throat tight. "I fear I've failed him," he whispered. "Every teaching says to avoid temptation, to keep pure distance, yet my heart—" "Your heart?" "My heart sees you." The words came slowly, weighted with truth. "Not as others do, with judgment or desire. I see your spirit, bright as this flame, and I love what I see, though I dare not show it as other men might." Tears slid down Addison's cheeks, catching the candlelight. "You've shown it in every silent kindness, in every prayer shared across this room. You saw my soul when others saw only shame." "The Lord commands us to love purely," Adrian said. "I cannot offer what the world calls love. Cannot touch your hand or promise earthly comfort. But I can promise to stand beside you before God and man both, seeking his justice." "That's worth more than any touch," Addison whispered. They cleared the table together, moving in the practiced dance of distance they'd learned. Then, as they had so many nights before, they knelt on opposite sides of the workshop. Their prayers rose together, for wisdom, for strength, for the peace they both sensed approaching. The night deepened. Their prayers continued, sometimes whispered, sometimes silent. They spoke of hopes long buried, of fears finally faced, of the strange grace that had brought them together in this place of refuge. When the first pearly light of dawn began to glow through the workshop windows, Adrian felt an unfamiliar contentment. Surely the Lord would not have led them so far to abandon them now. Surely truth and justice would prevail. "Whatever comes," he said softly, "know that you helped me understand his love better. Perfect love casts out fear." "And perfect truth brings peace," Addison replied, her face serene in the growing light. Neither of them heard the crunch of boots on gravel, or saw the shadows of approaching men moving down the lane toward the workshop. Their hearts were too full of dawn's promise to sense the gathering storm. The next afternoon brought heavy clouds and a chill wind that rattled the workshop windows. Adrian stood at his workbench, carefully sanding the wooden sparrow he'd carved for Addison, when the thundering of hooves shattered the peace. Before he could move, the door burst open. Amos strode in, flanked by 4 rough-looking men. "Time's up, cousin," Amos sneered, his fancy vest gleaming with silver buttons. "Bishop's waiting at the meeting house." 2 men seized Adrian's arms. He didn't resist, letting the carved bird fall softly onto the workbench. Through the window he glimpsed Addison's pale face watching from the barn, just as they'd feared this moment would come. They half-dragged him down the muddy lane, past the budding apple trees he'd planted 5 springs ago. Other members of the community emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Women in plain dresses gathered their children close. Men in broad-brimmed hats looked away, unwilling to meet his eyes. The meeting house stood stark against the gray sky, its whitewashed walls a reminder of the purity Adrian had failed to maintain. Inside, wooden benches creaked as the congregation shifted uncomfortably. Bishop Kaufman sat at the front, his weathered face grave beneath his full beard. "Adrian Stoltzfus," the bishop intoned, "you stand accused of harboring a woman alone in your home, breaking our most sacred vows of separation and purity. How do you answer?" Adrian lifted his chin. "I have shown mercy to one in need. If that be sin, I accept the judgment." Amos stepped forward, his boots leaving mud on the clean floor. "He's hidden her for weeks. A fallen woman cast, off even by her own kind. I've seen her myself." Whispers rippled through the gathering. Adrian remained silent, his hands clasped before him. The door creaked open, and Addison slipped inside, her borrowed dress marking her as both belong and stranger. She moved toward the front, but an elder raised his hand. "Women do not speak in matters of church discipline," he warned. "Please," Addison began anyway, her voice trembling. "You don't understand." "Silence!" Bishop Kaufman's command echoed from the rafters. "Adrian, will you name this woman as witness to your innocence or guilt?" Adrian met Addison's desperate gaze for a moment, then looked away. "I claim full responsibility for my actions. Let no blame fall on another." The bishop's shoulders sagged, as if bearing a great weight. "Then you leave us no choice. By the authority of our Ordnung and the will of God, I declare you Meidung, cut off from our community, our table, and our aid." A sob escaped from somewhere in the congregation. Perhaps his sister, or one of the neighbors he'd helped through hard times. "Your property will be auctioned within the week," the bishop continued. "Your tools, livestock, and land distributed according to our ways. Until then, you may not enter your workshop or house except to gather personal belongings." Adrian bowed his head. "Even so, I pray God's blessing on this gathering, and on you, Cousin Amos, though you seek my ruin." Amos's face flushed dark red. He started forward, but the bishop's stern look held him back. "Take your leave," the bishop commanded. "You are no longer one of us." Adrian turned toward the door, his steps steady despite the weight crushing his chest. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the first drops of rain. Behind him, he heard running feet and Addison's voice calling his name. She caught up to him at the cemetery fence, where generations of his family lay beneath simple stones. Her cheeks were wet with tears, or rain. He couldn't tell which. "I won't let you face this alone," she declared. "Everything you've lost, it's because of me. But I swear by all that's holy I'll stand by you through whatever comes next." Adrian looked at her then, seeing not the scandal others claimed, but a soul as bright and true as any he'd known. "The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away," he said softly. "But he cannot take what matters most, our faith in his mercy." Thunder rolled across the hills as they stood there, two outcasts finding strength in shared conviction. Behind them, the meeting house door opened and closed as the congregation dispersed, leaving them alone with the rain and the wind and the promise of harder days ahead. The cost of mercy had been counted, and Adrian had paid it in full. Yet standing there, watching his world crumble around him, he felt a curious peace. He had chosen truth over safety, compassion over law, love over fear. Whatever trials lay ahead, he would face them knowing his conscience was clear before God, if not before men. Darkness settled over the valley like a heavy blanket as Adrian moved through his workshop one last time. The familiar scents of sawdust and leather brought tears to his eyes, but he blinked them away. His calloused hands found only the essentials by lantern light. A few tools, some bread, his mother's Bible. The The rest would go to auction, payment for his choice of mercy over law. He rolled these meager belongings into his wool blanket, securing them with leather straps. The wooden sparrow he'd carved for Addison lay forgotten on his workbench, a final witness to his exodus. Outside, the night air bit sharp and cold through his black coat. "Please go back inside," he whispered, when he spotted Addison waiting by the barn. She wore the plain dress and bonnet she'd borrowed weeks ago, a small bundle clutched to her chest. "I won't," she answered simply. "Your path is mine now." Adrian's protest died on his lips. He knew that determined look, the same one she'd worn when defending the injured colt. Without another word, they started down the snow-crusted lane, past the mailbox he'd built himself 5 summers ago. Neither looked back at the darkened house. They followed the old creek road until it met the river, now mostly frozen in the grip of late winter. Dead cattails rattled in the wind as Adrian strung a tattered tarp between 2 bare cottonwoods. The canvas snapped and billowed like a restless ghost. "The ground's too frozen to stake it proper," he muttered, weighing down the corners with stones. The makeshift shelter was pitiful compared to the solid roof they'd left behind, but it would have to do. Gathering fallen branches, Adrian built a small fire, careful to keep it low and smokeless. The flames cast dancing shadows across their faces as sleet began to fall, hissing against the tarp. Without hesitation, he removed his heavy coat and draped it over Addison's shoulders. "You'll freeze," she protested. "The cold matters less to me than your comfort." His voice was gentle but firm. Addison pulled the coat tight, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and honest work that clung to the fabric. The sleet grew heavier, transforming their little camp into a world of ice and shadow. Only the fire held back the darkness, its warmth a poor substitute for the home they'd lost. "Adrian," she said suddenly, her voice carrying above the wind. "Marry me." He turned to her, startled. "What?" "Here, now, before God as our witness." Her eyes reflected the flames as she continued. "We need no priest or bishop's blessing, only prayer and honest hearts." Adrian's hands trembled as he fed another stick to the fire. "Addison, I cannot." "Why not? We've lost everything else. Why deny ourselves this comfort?" "Because I will not bind you to an outcast," he said softly. "You deserve better than a shunned man with empty pockets and a stained name." "Your name is stained with mercy," she countered. "The finest cloth I've ever known." He shook his head, though the yearning in his heart nearly overwhelmed his resolve. "The path ahead is too uncertain. I won't have you share my shame." "I already share it willingly," she whispered. The sleet turned to snow as the night deepened. They huddled closer to the fire, watching sparks spiral up toward the hidden stars. Despite his protests about the coat, Adrian's teeth began to chatter. Wordlessly, Addison shifted closer until her shoulder pressed against his. After a moment's hesitation, he allowed himself to accept this small comfort. Near dawn, as the fire burned low, Addison rested her head gently on his shoulder. The simple touch sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with flames. Adrian lifted his face to the lightening sky and began to pray aloud, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. "Lord, we are lost sheep seeking your fold. Guide our steps through this wilderness. Grant us strength to bear what must be borne, and wisdom to know your will. Though we walk through shadow, let your light show us the way." As his words faded into the pre-dawn stillness, a chorus of wolf howls rose from the distant hills. The eerie sound rolled across the frozen river, mingling with the faint tolling of church bells carried on the wind. The bells would be calling the faithful to morning prayer. a world now closed to them forever. Addison shivered against him, though whether from cold or sorrow he couldn't tell. The coat still draped her shoulders, dusted with frost like a wedding veil never to be worn. Together they watched their breath form clouds in the gray light, two souls bound by something deeper than ceremony or law. The fire sputtered and died as the last stars faded. Soon they would need to move on, seeking shelter far from familiar faces. But for now, they remained still, drawing strength from shared faith and the warmth of hearts beating in time with one another. The wolf howls faded, but the church bells rang on, a bittersweet reminder of all they had lost and all they had found. Morning brought no comfort to the wanderers. Adrian and Addison gathered their few belongings, shaking frost from the tarp before folding it away. Their breath clouded in the bitter air as they began walking toward town, hoping to find passage east on a freight wagon or stage. "We will need to be careful," Adrian said softly as they trudged along the muddy road. "Many eyes will be watching." Addison nodded, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. They had walked perhaps 3 miles when the abandoned Whitaker mill came into view, its water wheel frozen in place like a great, motionless clock. The weathered building stood as a gray sentinel against the pale sky, windows dark and empty. A horse's snort broke the stillness. Adrian stopped, reaching back to halt Addison with a gentle gesture. From behind the mill emerged Amos Stoltzfus, swaying in his saddle. His face was flushed, and a bottle dangled from one hand. When he saw them, his lips twisted into a sneer. "Well, if it ain't the holy man and his whore," Amos slurred, dismounting unsteadily. His spurs rang against the frozen ground. Adrian stepped forward, placing himself between Addison and his cousin. "Let us pass in peace, Amos." "Peace!" Amos spat on the ground. "There ain't no peace for sinners." He drew a pistol from his coat, the metal gleaming dully in the winter light. "The girl comes with me. Time she paid for what she saw." "No." Adrian's voice was quiet but firm. He spread his arms wide, making himself a broader target. "If sin must end, let it end with me." Amos's hand trembled as he aimed the pistol. "Always thought you was better than me, didn't you? With your prayers and your pure life?" His words slurred together, bitter as wormwood. "You're nothing but a coward hiding behind God." "I harbor no hatred for you, cousin," Adrian said, "even now." The pistol wavered. Addison's terrified breathing seemed loud in the frozen air. Amos's finger tightened on the trigger, and the shot cracked across the valley like breaking ice. The bullet whined past Adrian's ear, missing him by inches. Before Amos could fire again, hoofbeats thundered from the tree line. Marshal Samuel Crane and 3 deputies burst into view, rifles raised. They had been tracking Amos since receiving Adrian's letter, following his trail through the night. "Drop the gun, Stoltzfus," Crane's voice rang with authority. Amos whirled, bringing his pistol to bear on the lawman. The marshal's rifle cracked once, sharp and final. Amos jerked backward, the bottle shattering as it fell from his hand. He looked almost surprised as he crumpled to the ground, scarlet spreading across his chest. Addison gave a choked cry and collapsed to her knees in the snow. Without thinking, Adrian turned and gathered her into his arms, his first human touch in years. The feeling of her trembling against him broke through decades of restraint. Yet there was nothing impure in the embrace. It felt like coming home after a long exile. "It's finished," he whispered, stroking her hair as she wept. "It's finished now." The deputies dismounted, moving to secure Amos. Marshal Crane approached slowly, his rifle lowered. "Your letter reached us yesterday," he said to Adrian. "We've been hunting him since the deputy's murder. Seems the Lord's timing was perfect." Adrian nodded, still holding Addison close. Snow began to fall again, soft and thick, tinted red by the setting sun. The flakes settled on Amos's still form like a shroud, turning the spilled whiskey pink where it stained the ground. "The girl will need to testify," Crane continued more gently, "but given the circumstances, I reckon that can wait till morning. There's a widow's house near here where you both can rest tonight. I'll see no one troubles you." "Thank you, Marshal," Adrian said quietly. His arms tightened protectively around Addison as she shuddered with another sob. The snow fell harder now, blurring the edges of the world. The old mill loomed behind them like a shadow of the past, while before them stretched a road made new by fresh powder. Adrian felt the weight of his choices settle into place. Choices of mercy over law, love over fear, grace over judgment. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The marshal's men carried Amos's body to a waiting wagon, their movements gentle despite everything. Adrian watched them go, whispering a final prayer for his cousin's soul. The snow continued to fall as the sun sank lower, each flake catching the light like a tiny flame. The days lengthened into weeks as spring crept back to the Colorado frontier. Fresh grass pushed through melting snow, and morning birdsong replaced winter's silence. Marshal Crane had been busy during this time, gathering testimonies and evidence that finally cleared Addison's name of any wrongdoing. When word reached Bishop Kaufman, he called for a gathering at the meeting house. The community filled the plain wooden benches, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Adrian and Addison entered together, their steps measured and dignified. Though whispers rustled through the crowd, they held their heads high. Addison stood before the assembly, her voice clear and steady as she spoke her truth. "Adrian Stoltzfus showed me what true faith looks like," she said, meeting the bishop's gaze. "In all the weeks I sheltered at his farm, he never once touched me or acted improperly. The only time he laid hands on me was the day he saved my life from Amos's bullet." The bishop's weathered hands gripped his Bible tightly. When he spoke, his voice trembled with emotion. "We have witnessed something remarkable here," he said. Perhaps God's mercy is wider than our Ordnung. We were quick to judge, but slow to see his hand at work." He turned to Adrian. "Brother Stoltzfus, your fellowship is restored. Your farm awaits your return." Adrian rose slowly, his quiet voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I am grateful for your mercy, Bishop, but I cannot return to the old farm." A murmur went through the crowd as he continued. "Instead, I propose to build a home for wanderers, a place where those seeking forgiveness may find shelter, as Addison once did with me." Addison stepped forward, her eyes bright. "I would help build this home," she offered. "Let it be a testament that grace can bloom even in winter's hardest ground." The gathered community sat in thoughtful silence. Then, one by one, they began to file out of the meeting house. No harsh words were spoken, no accusations made. Instead, there was a sense of something new taking root, a wider understanding of faith and forgiveness. The bishop was the last to leave, pausing at the door to observe Adrian and Addison standing together in the spring sunlight that streamed through the windows. Their faces glowed with quiet joy as they began to discuss their plans for the new home. The summer sun warmed the Colorado Valley as a new barn took shape beside the flowing creek. Its sturdy frame rose day by day, built by hands both plain and English working in harmony. The scene would have been unthinkable just months before. Amish men in their suspenders laboring alongside townsfolk in standard dress, their differences forgotten in shared purpose. Addison moved among the workers, her quiet confidence a far cry from the frightened woman who had once stumbled through a snowstorm. She carried water, distributed nails, and directed the placement of support beams with natural grace. Her plain dress now suited her perfectly, worn not from obligation, but choice. Adrian supervised the main construction, his deep voice carrying instructions across the site. Though he remained reserved, joy sparked in his eyes whenever they met Addison's. The sound of hammers rang out like bells, punctuated by occasional laughter and calls of encouragement. As dusk approached, the final beam was hoisted into place. The workers gathered below, faces tired but satisfied, as Adrian secured the last nail. Golden light spilled across the new timber, casting long shadows across the packed earth. In full view of everyone, Adrian descended the ladder and walked to where Addison stood. Without hesitation, he reached for her hand, their first touch in daylight before witnesses. His voice was soft, but clear as he spoke. "It wasn't the touch I feared," he said, his fingers gentle against hers, but forgetting who gave us hands to heal. The church bells from town drifted across the valley, their melody carrying on the evening breeze. Addison's eyes shimmered with tears as she smiled up at him, squeezing his hand in response. Together, they stepped through the wide doors into their finished barn. Warm light spilled through the high windows, catching dust motes that danced like falling stars above the rough-hewn boards. They knelt there, hands still joined, and lifted their voices in a prayer of thanksgiving. Their words echoed through the valley like a hymn, rising toward the darkening sky, a song of grace made manifest through love and labor shared. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.